My wife and I have always lived a quiet life in the country with our son, Wesley. Our 9-acre property is surrounded to the north and the east by a forest where Wesley would often go play with his friends or by himself. For his 8th birthday, I had gone into the forest with Wesley to help him make his own tree fort where he could stash his comic books, Game Boys, toys, and treasures that he would find while exploring the woods behind our house. He amassed quite the collection of interesting rocks and bugs, which he stored in mason jars in his forest base, and he spent most of his free time just a few hundred yards away from our house. It was a peaceful life that we had for ourselves. I would take our car into work on the weekdays and bring my wife to town right after Wesley's bus arrived to take him to school. Each day was the same routine, and we spent the weekends together at the house. In short, we were all very happy. This week is the 6th anniversary of my son Wesley's disappearance. To this day, we don't know what happened to him on that brisk autumn evening, but from the moment our 12-year-old son left the house, we had a sneaking suspicion he was never coming back. On Friday, August 3rd, 2013, our daily morning ritual happened as it always had. I would wake up, eat breakfast with Kim and Wesley, and then wait for the bus to arrive. Wesley had a half day at school today, so he would return home before me or my wife were able to get home and watch him. This wasn't a big deal. He was 12 and could look after himself for a few hours. We told him to call my cell phone as soon as he got home after school that day, to make sure that he was home safely. As Wes climbed up the stairs onto the bus, my wife began to tremble and eventually break into tears. Neither of us knew what she was crying for, but we waved our son goodbye as both climbed into the car to finish off the work week. My cell phone rang at exactly 12:33 that afternoon. My iPhone played the default marimba tone, and I saw I was receiving a call from our home landline. Must have been Wesley, who had just gotten off the bus and ran into our home, obeying my instructions to call. When I slid my finger across the screen and answered the phone, the only thing I heard was the empty dial tone of our home landline. As if he hadn't typed out my number yet. I called out his name a few times through my cell, but there was nothing. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. He did as he was instructed, called Dad as soon as he got home, and must have sprinted out the door to go play in the woods. I thought nothing of it, until I got home. I picked up my wife from the store on the way back to the house. The porch lights were on, which is our family's way of indirectly saying someone's home. Upon entering our house, I called out to Wesley to see if he was in his room. I got no response, so I assumed he was still outside in the woods. Even 5 hours after his call. My kid always loved that fort that I built him. Kim began making dinner, and I changed my clothes and went to the spot in the woods where my son and I had constructed his home away from home. It was starting to get dark, so it was a bit difficult to see through the woods. I spotted the light from his treehouse lamp on through the window, and, as a dad should, began silently creeping up the short ladder nailed into the tree to scare the crap out of him. And when I reached the top, I quickly swung the curtain door open and let out a roar in an attempt to scare my poor unsuspecting son. However, after scanning the small room, Wesley wasn't sitting in his beanbag chair as he normally would. In fact, the chair and his entire collection of rocks, bugs, comics, and games were completely gone off the wooden shelves. The only things in the room were the lit Centronella camping light that had been given to him when we built the treehouse, and a single Skechers sneaker lying in the middle of the room. The shoe was facing the doorway. I walked over to pick it up and examined it in the light of the treehouse lamp. Nothing was unusual about it, but it was Wesley's. I peeked out the window, wondering where my son could have run off to, with only one shoe. The darkness had started to creep over the entire forest, and it would eventually be very dark in no time. I called out into the twilight several times with no response. He was probably waiting in, hiding to scare me. And it was working. I was terrified already. I left the lamp on and descended the ladder of the treehouse, continuing to scan the dim area for my son. I called and searched for 30 minutes in the dark, getting no response. I was beginning to panic. Sprinting back in the direction of our home, I noticed that the light in his room was on. A wave of calm and relaxation washed over me. He must have snuck back home when I was out here searching for him, little bugger. I opened the back door and entered the kitchen, immediately greeted by my wife, asking about the shoe in my hand and where her little Wesley was. I explained what happened, and she told me that he hadn't come home. Once again beginning to panic, I sprinted down the hallway to his room and flung the door open. The light to the room was off, and the interior was completely bare. Now, I know I saw his light on when I was returning home from the woods. I flipped the light on with my right hand, still clutching his sneaker with my left. The room was completely empty. His bed, dresser, posters, rug, and bookshelf were completely gone. My wife heard my scream and came instantly rushing to my side, and then she screamed too. We didn't scream at anything we saw, but by the complete lack of something that was before us. Wesley and his possessions were nowhere to be seen, besides the shoe that I clutched. Examining it once more in the bare light of his room, a single word had appeared on the sole of his shoe. Only when viewing it in his room. The word didn't appear anywhere else in the house, only his room. The word "don't" was clearly visible in black block letters on its bottom. Kim immediately called the police and reported a theft, kidnapping, missing child, breaking and entering, and everything. I had already grabbed the flashlight and was combing the woods looking for any signs of my missing child. The police arrived and I told them everything that had happened. The police helped us search the woods and surrounding area for hours. We searched for days and then weeks, months. Wesley never returned to our house. Once a week, I would visit his hideout in the woods, which was now overgrown from the months spent untouched, and I left food and water in hopes that he was hiding somewhere in the woods. But the food just sat on the floor, rotting and filling with bugs. Time blended together. We began to gradually lose hope of ever seeing our boy again. An entire year passed and I continued to make weekly trips to the hideout just in case he would someday return. August 23rd, Wesley's disappearance anniversary, landed on a Saturday in 2014. I reclined in silent mourning on my love seat while I recalled the events of exactly 1 year ago. As I sat on the couch, my cell phone rang. The caller ID was our home landline. But I looked over to see our clunky phone set in its home on the dock. No one was using it. The time on the clock next to it read 12:33. I frantically answered the phone, hoping to hear something, anything. A dial tone, just like 1 year ago. Today, I brought Wesley's favorite snack, Cheetos and an Arnold Palmer sweet tea, to bring out to his hideout, but I forgot them on the counter as I sprinted out of the house. It didn't matter. I climbed the ladder of the fort and flung the curtain open. It smelled bad because of the rotten bread that I had left last week, but I would take last week's meal back to the house whenever I left. Half expecting to see the bare room as I had every single week following his disappearance, the long burnt-out citronella lamp flared on with my entrance, revealing the object sitting in front of me. Wesley's other shoe, once again facing the door. In stunned astonishment, I scooped up the shoe, examining it for another word. Once again recalling 1 year ago, I sprinted as fast as I could back to the house. The light of his room was mysteriously on. I blazed past Kim in the kitchen and beelined straight to Wesley's room. I paused for a moment outside the door, noticing that no light was visible under it. The same as it was 1 year ago. I opened the door as Kim ran down the hall and followed me. She realized what I had discovered, and together we shared the same mixture of anguish and hope. As I flipped on the light switch, the empty sole of the shoe now displayed another single word. Bother. We looked at each other in silence as the tears streamed down our faces. I placed the shoe next to its partner in the center of the room, reading the phrase, don't bother. Each year since, my wife and I have found another piece of Wesley's clothing in the treehouse. The clues only appeared on August 23rd after I received the phantom phone call from our home landline at exactly 12:33. When I received the call in 2015, I had requested the day off from work. I waited with my phone in my hand at the bottom of the ladder of the treehouse. As soon as my expected call rang, answered, and repeated the dial tone, I flung myself up the ladder into the treehouse. And the same scene as before. Curtain open, light on, the object in the middle of the room. This time, Wesley's pants lay on the floor, feet facing the door. Grabbing them and sprinting to his room felt all too familiar. I flipped the light on once again and read the next word on him. Printed this time on the butt of the jeans. This year the word was looking. August 23rd, 2016. It became tradition for me on these days to miss all other obligations. I wanted to figure out this mystery of my son. The time was 12:32 and I sat cross-legged in the empty hideout, waiting as the seconds ticked by until the inevitable phone call. To my surprise, the phone clock ticked to 12:33 and no call arrived. I waited for another minute, then 5, then 10. Giving up, I descended the ladder. Once my feet touched the ground, my phone instantly rang. Home landline, repeat last year, the curtain, lamp, and object. This year was Wesley's shirt. The same striped, long-sleeved t-shirt that I had seen him in. In his bedroom, I read the next word printed across the back. 4. I already dreaded what next year would bring. I knew that the next word would be him. Some sadistic asshole had kidnapped my son and stole all his possessions, and now they were toying with me, throwing in my face the fact that I had completely failed as a father. August 23rd, 2017. I waited outside the hideout for the call once again. I stood on the tiny deck in front of the curtain until I received the call, but it never came. It seemed that nothing would happen until I was completely on the ground, away from the treehouse. I climbed down the ladder, received the call, and returned to the fort. Wesley's underwear. That was a bit messed up, if you ask me, however. Each article of clothing I had retrieved from the fort was completely clean, as if it was washed that day. The underwear was no exception. Returning to his room, my hunch over the next word was completely proven wrong. Me. Placing the underwear next to the rest of the clothing, I read the words in order. Don't bother looking for me. Now it's 2018, and my son's disappearance anniversary, if you can call it that, was 3 days ago. Nothing showed up in the treehouse, no phone calls, no clothing. I checked. Nothing new was added to the puzzle of his disappearance. I checked his room last night to see the 5 pieces of clothing in the room, as I did quite often, but nothing was there. On the 6th anniversary of his disappearance, all the articles disappeared. No one could have taken them. I had boarded up the windows to Wesley's room and locked the door 3 times over. Those clothes were the last mementos that me and Kim had of our little boy, and now they were gone, too. It's been 1 month since I first made my post about Wesley. And quite a few things have happened in that time. I read through your suggestions on my last post. A lot of you are relating my experience to other supernatural occurrences, like the events of Stranger Things and the disappearance of Will Byers. Considering that this is a television show, it's highly unlikely that there is a separate mirror dimension in which he was taken to. That didn't stop the events of the situation from forcing my mind to wonder. No matter how hard I had researched or checked, there was no secret government facility nearby, no powerful portals, no other instance of children disappearing, only my Wesley. Other suggestions seemed concerned about my wife crying on the day Wesley disappeared, and Kim and I have yet to find a reason behind that. She told me that she didn't feel sad. The tears just came. And to this day, we don't know why. Kim and I didn't know what to believe. If we were being fooled with by some psychopath, if there was some sort of poltergeist, or if we had simply lost our minds from the trauma of losing our only child. We began to lose hope that we were ever going to see him again. But when we least expected it, Wesley came home. The 23rd of August was usually when we got another piece of the puzzle of our missing child, but as you have already read, nothing had occurred this year. Instead, we lost these precious pieces. A month of silent thought and despair took over our lives as we prepared to say goodbye to Wesley for good. We figured that this was the end of the line, his kidnapper, or his own way of saying goodbye to us forever. But on September 23rd, 2018, the back door to our house opened, and a silhouette stood in the doorway. This time, the time was 12:33, just like before. I turned my head from the comfort of my love seat in the living room. In response to the sound of the door opening, with my own two eyes, I saw the face of my son, who had been missing for 5 years. In absolute stunned silence, my jaw fell to the floor. Tears welled up in my eyes as I rose from my chair and rushed to greet him. Kim noticed as well, because she screamed in pure joy to see Wesley again. The next thing I knew, I was kneeling and hugging my child's real flesh and bone, and at certain times I was scared that my wife and I would crush him under the pressure of our mutual embrace. Seeing his familiar face relieved me from the memories of these past 5 years filled with anguish and devastation. It was really him. He was home. After minutes of hugging and sobbing with joy, we released him and stepped back. I knelt beside him and looked him over to check for injuries, aging, or signs of starvation. It was at that moment that we realized something heartbreakingly insane. 5 years had passed. Yet Wesley had not aged. He was still wearing the same clothes that he disappeared in. The very same garments that I had found in the treehouse and collected all those years before. He was still 12 years old, and his face and body still confirmed this. Kim noticed as well, because I saw her cover her mouth in awe. We exchanged glances of confused horror. Wesley looked at each of our faces and then spoke. "Mom? Dad, what's wrong? I was just out in the woods. I was hanging out in my tree fort." He looked at the clock on the wall. "I've only been outside 15 minutes. Not realizing the gravity of this statement, he chuckled. It was just a small little laugh, but enough to set off a nuclear bomb of emotions inside me and Kim. Excitement turned to sorrow, and Kim turned her back to Wesley and began sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't bring myself to do anything. I knelt there and I stared at his face, his 12-year-old face, and I couldn't understand. I finally brought myself to speak hoarsely, and through a broken voice, I asked him questions. So many questions that he didn't even have time to respond in between them. I needed answers. "Dad, what's going on? My fort was exactly as I left it last night. I did exactly what you asked. I called your phone when I got home from school. Then I ran out the door to the treehouse. I came back just now to grab a snack. Why are you even home? Shouldn't you be at work at noon on a Friday?" I just stared at him. I couldn't think of a coherent response. My wife left our room, and I could hear her muffled wailing from down the hall. I brought Wesley into the living room and sat him down on the couch across from me. I shut off the TV that was still playing and dialed my focus completely on him. I needed answers, one by one. "Wes, do you know what day it is?" It's Friday. Can I go back outside now? You're starting to creep me out." He stood up to leave, but I grabbed his arm to prevent him from leaving the room. As far as I was concerned, he is never leaving my sight again. "What's the date, Wesley? What day is it?" I may have said this with a bit too much intensity, because he reeled back slightly when I said it. "Geez, chill out. It's the 23rd. Why do you care?" He seemed hurt and perhaps slightly scared. He knew nothing of what happened. I asked him to carefully explain to me what happened today, minute by minute. From what he told me, Wesley had never even experienced disappearing. His story, word for word, was as follows. "I got on the bus this morning while you and Mom stood on the porch and waved goodbye to me. I rode the bus 10 minutes to school, sitting next to Daniel, and then I went to class. At noon, the teacher dismissed us. I got back on the bus. I rode back home. I went inside, turned on the porch light like we always do, and then called your phone like you told me to. You didn't answer, so I hung up and I went outside. I came back inside just now because I wanted a snack. Can I go now? I didn't know if I should tell him about anything. How would he take the news that he just missed 5 years of his life? I stood up and I calmly told him to follow me. Together we walked down the dark hallway to his room, noting the light was on from the crack below the door. I hadn't left it on since I had last visited this barren place, and I immediately swung the door open. Everything was as it had been. His bed and posters and shelves and drawers were all replaced in the exact same way that it used to be. Putting two and two together in my head, I frantically beckoned Wes to follow me outside. I sprinted to the treehouse and my son followed, still questioning me on what the hell was going on. I stood at the bottom of the ladder and braced myself for what was to come, even though I knew full well what was inside. Throwing open the curtain, the same phenomena as his bedroom. Everything neatly stacked in their shelves, comics and games and bugs and bottles. My knees grew weak, and I collapsed on the oaken floor. I dropped to my hands and knees and fell silent, trembling. I stared at the floor, feeling nauseous, cursing whoever or whatever had the audacity to play this cruel, twisted joke to me and my wife. Wesley knelt beside me and put his hand on my shoulder. His warm touch had brought me back to the perverse reality in which I was sitting. Dad, please tell me what's going on. I couldn't hide it anymore. I told him to sit in his beanbag and I took a seat in the windowsill next to him. I told him everything, starting with the phone call that fateful August afternoon. I told him about the treehouse and the clothes, about the room, the words, and the years that had gone by. I struggled to get through the story while also fighting back tears. He could tell I wasn't joking by the sheer amount of emotion in my voice. He stared at the ground. I showed him my phone, the phantom calls from home, which I had archived each year I received them. I cursed myself for never taking any pictures of the empty treehouse or his room, but his dead silence showed that he believed me fully. Finally, I showed him the current date, September 23rd, 2018. He shifted his eyes to meet my gaze, those beautiful brown eyes of his, and now glazed over with fear and sadness. What happened to me? There was nothing I could say back. I walked over to him, I wrapped him in my arms and held him tight. I had no idea what had happened. Until today, I had suspected that someone had taken him, but now that I had him back in my arms and seeing that he was still 12 years old, with no recollection of the last 5 whole years, I couldn't help considering the possibilities of the supernatural. Commenters on my last post sparked the idea in my brain, but there was nothing I could do to get it out of my head. We sat and we hugged each other for a long time. I felt his back convulsing as he cried, his face buried into the breast of my shirt. I held him as he wept, and the tears began to return to my eyes as well. My eyes drifted to the citronella lamp in the corner of the room that mysteriously turned on each year. Or at least, where it used to be. It was gone. Everything else in the treehouse returned, but the lamp was gone. I nudged Wesley, and I pointed to the corner of the room. He slowly lifted his head from my chest, sniffling and wiping his eyes. I had told him about the lamp during my story, of course, so he noticed that it was gone too. I stood up from the beanbag chair and examined the place where the lamp once was. There was a ring of dust from where it had been sitting for the past 9 years. A thought popped into my head out of nowhere, and I decided to test my current suspicions. I descended the ladder of the treehouse and I walked back to the house. Wesley followed me close behind, clutching the crook of my arm, as to never be separated from me again. We both experienced a bit of comfort in the subtle gesture. We walked to his room, where we promptly opened the door and took in the scene. Everything was back to normal. The Star Wars poster above his bed, the blue-green rug on the floor. Everything was there. I unscrewed the light bulb from the single ceiling light. If my suspicions were correct, then Ghost Alliance will have helped us uncover a great piece of the puzzle. The ceiling light didn't fit in a flashlight. The bulb was too big. Wesley looked at me curiously and then remembered the appearing words in the story. We both returned to the treehouse, light bulb in hand. There was nowhere for me to plug the light bulb in. The only light in the fort was the lamp, which was now gone. Of course, I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and turned on my flashlight app. I held my new light directly to the light bulb so that it shone through and cast a warped LED shimmer over the inner walls of the treehouse. Wesley screamed, and I took a step back. The walls were covered in ghastly handprints, and the floor was covered in spectral footprints, specifically around the sole window, leading out into the forest outside. Each of these was the same black color that the words were written with on the piece of clothing. I panned the room and I took it all in, ending my search on the shelf where the lamp used to be. There was writing. The same lettering that was written on the clothes, black block letters. Wesley saw me staring at it and came over to join me. The words were concise. Welcome home. Hey there, everyone who's listening on YouTube, or those of you who are listening on the podcast. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before you head out for the night, I just wanted to let you know about a couple of things. Without you, the show doesn't take place. So, if you guys would like to support the show, or if you guys would like to get your hands on a couple of cool little things whenever new things come out, check out patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and any support that you guys show, I really appreciate. So everyone who's already donated to the Patreon, I really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. And thank you so much for that. If you guys are looking for more Creepypasta Storytime, there's a new video that's uploaded to this channel or uploaded to the podcast every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday now. You can be able to get more from me at facebook.com/MrCreepyPasta or on Twitter at MrCreepyPasta and then the number 0. Thanks so much for listening, kids, and for your support. And sweet dreams.